Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today. The past year has certainly been challenging. We've had to find new ways to do business, engage with our communities, and advocate for a stronger, more inclusive real estate industry, often without leaving our homes. Thanks to your hard work and the work of our Realtor Party team, there's a reason to be optimistic about the future. Today, we will spotlight the importance of this powerful alliance of realtors and realtor associations. Our recent advocacy wins have been nothing short of extraordinary. In March, President Biden signed into law a new round of COVID-19 relief known as the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. As that bill moved through Congress, we made sure lawmakers knew which items were critical to the 1.4 million realtors that drive our nation's economy. The $1.9 trillion legislative package contains an array of measures championed by NAR, including new aid for state and local governments, the creation of a homeowners assistance fund and a small business grant program, and additional relief for middle-class Americans, renters, and those who have lost their jobs. The plan sent stimulus checks to up to $1,400 to 145 million households, extended the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program $300 weekly supplemental benefit through early September, and sent $350 billion in aid to state and local governments. The American Rescue Plan also included an additional $21.5 billion in rental assistance, provided $20 million to help fair housing organizations meet their increased needs, set aside $15 billion for a new small business grant program, allocated $10 billion to a housing assistance fund that will allow state housing finance agencies to help homeowners facing hardship due to COVID-19, and provide $100 million for housing counseling services. Our advocacy team was also the driving force behind earlier COVID-19 relief packages. We worked closely with Congress to deliver on key NAR priorities, including an increase in fair housing funding, a 5-year extension of the mortgage debt forgiveness exclusion, and expansion of improvement of the low-income housing tax credit, and greater flexibility for small businesses with a Paycheck Protection Program. Last year, our advocacy team also helped establish an historic precedent. For the first time ever, independent contractors across the country became eligible for Small Business Administration loans, unemployment assistance, and paid sick and family leave. And we have a robust policy agenda we're looking to advance in 2021. First, we'll continue to fight for a swift economic recovery post-COVID-19. NAR will promote reforms that ease lending restrictions in sectors hit hard by the pandemic, advocate for additional funds to help small businesses meet their expenses and keep workers on the payroll, and work to ensure federal rental assistance is operating well and is sufficiently funded. We're also advocating for stronger, resilient communities and businesses. We're calling on lawmakers to preserve community development tools such as the 1031, like-kind exchange, and opportunity zones, ensure that real estate professionals can continue to be independent contractors if they choose, and invest in our nation's infrastructure. Further, we're focused on improving access to homeownership. That means boosting the supply of housing, providing additional tax incentives for property ownership, improving access to credit for all Americans, preserving and protecting the 30-year mortgage, and helping Americans with student loan debt buy homes. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we're working to dismantle barriers to fair housing. Over a year ago, we implemented our Fair Housing Act plan, which emphasizes accountability, culture change, and training. We will continue to make sure that that plan commits realtors to protecting housing rights for all Americans. In addition, we've created a member-focused implicit bias training video, which offers practical tools for overcoming biases and negative stereotypes. You can find more information at nar.realtor/fairhousing. No matter what comes our way next, two things are certain. One, NAR advocacy team will keep advocating for policies that benefit our clients, our businesses, and our communities. And two, the Realtor Party will continue to pay close attention to the needs of the state and local associations. I hope you'll join me in supporting NAR's robust policy agenda this year. One way you can do so is by applying for and leveraging the many community outreach programs and grants available through the Realtor Party. These programs and grants can help your state and local association get lawmakers and the public behind our advocacy efforts. For instance, the Housing Opportunity Grant Program supports either the creation or improvement of community systems and policies that would expand access to affordable housing. The Fair Housing Grant Program provides funding for activities and partnerships that further the fair housing mission and boost equity in our communities. And the Placemaking Grant Program helps communities become better places to live by transforming unused or underused sites into welcoming destinations accessible to everyone. These are just a few examples of grants and resources offered. For more information on how to get and engage with any of these programs, visit realtorparty.realtor/community outreach. Clearly, there's a lot at stake for realtors moving forward. Supporting Rpac, the realtor backbone of the Realtor Party, bolsters our advocacy and outreach work. Your investment cements our ability to evaluate legislation and regulation and how they'll impact you, your clients, and your communities. The Realtor Party is effective at all levels of government precisely because of our grassroots strength. Only 30% of Rpac funds go to candidates for federal office. That leaves 70% for state and local associations to support candidates for state and local office. So, if you're looking to make a positive impact on laws affecting our industry coming out of Washington, policies under consideration in your state house, or rules governing key issues like zoning in your communities, you absolutely can. Through Rpac, you can make sure your voice is not just heard, but valued. We all do better when we work together. Our panelists today will speak to that. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you 6 highly effective realtor leaders and association staff members who have notched major advocacy wins at the state and local level. They'll educate us on how they secured those wins and offer us some lessons on how we can apply in our own advocacy work back home, in our states, and in our communities. Our first panelists are Darren Watkins and Tom Hormel, who will speak on behalf of the Spokane Association of Realtors. They'll explain how they ran a successful advocacy campaign that helped elect an entirely new pro-growth city council. Then we'll hear from Dee Dee Miller and Susan Mitchell from the Maryland Realtors. Dee Dee and Susan will address her association's Open Door to Stronger Communities campaign, which will support legislation to expand housing opportunities. Finally, from Colorado Realtors, we have Liz Peets and Will Flowers. They'll update us on Association's Century of Opportunity legislative package, which aims to improve the homeownership landscape specifically for people of color. So without further ado, I'll hand over the mic to our friends from Spokane, who will kick off these exciting success story spotlights. Please join me in welcoming Tom Hormel, the 2021 president of the Washington Realtors. Presenting alongside Tom is Darren Watkins, the Government Affairs Director of the Spokane Realtors. Gentlemen, the screen is yours.
Kevin, thanks so much for this opportunity. This was really, this was at times an exhilarating yet terrifying journey, but it was one that who else would do this but realtors? Realtors truly are the voice and the advocates for the people in our community when it comes to housing. And so I want to paint a story for you. I'll take you back to 2017. I want to tell you about what happened here in Spokane. The problem with Spokane was that we had become, like many communities, Spokane is divided. We're about 1/3 Democrats, 1/3 Republicans, or leaning Republicans and Democrats, and the rest are in the middle, undecided about either way. And what happened was, starting in 2017, we really noticed we had a very, very progressively liberal city council. So, for example, instead of streets and issues that you typically deal with, ours was restricting building. They were also tackling a lot of issues that typically don't find their way in the city. Like, we declared ourselves a nuclear weapon free zone. We banned oil trains, which was overturned because it's a federal rule. We had a series of public declarations denouncing the president. Now, these are all national issues, but our city council was pushed away over there. So in 2019, we had a political opportunity. There was a seat that was open for the mayor. And at the same time, there was also an open city council president race, and we had open city council races as well, with two incumbents trying to move up. So how do we do that? Well, entering into this whole mix was a very interesting Spokane mayor race. A longtime politician versus an absolute newcomer. Ben was a 3-term progressive council member. At the same time, we had an news anchor who'd been on television for close to 3 decades, but people knew who she was. But it was an interesting contrast. When we talked to them both about what is your housing policies, one had some very specific policy ideas that as realtors, we didn't know that was going to work. The other one was a coalition builder and said, frankly, I don't have the answer, but with your help, I will. So the challenge became, our members were asking this very simple question: what can we do? What can we do when you're faced with this level of leadership and adversity? And the answer for us in Spokane was, you call the NAR superheroes. That's what we call them, because NAR truly stepped in and helped us, guide us to a very strong advocacy campaign. What does that mean? Well, first off, they provided us a political toolbox. And that included such important things such as polling information. They told us what the most important issues were. They also told us about who was the most likely to win or not win. They gave us campaigning recommendations. And then we step into an area which is brand new for anybody who's not done this before, called independent expenditures. And what that essentially means is you're going to run a campaign completely separate from the candidate. You won't talk to the candidate. You won't be part of that, but you will essentially run a campaign in support of that person on behalf of your members. So to do that, the political toolbox, what goes into that? Well, there were mailers. We used door-to-door campaigns. We used some digital advertising, all on behalf of the candidates. On the other side, suddenly we started getting a lot of attention. Why are realtors supporting candidates now? What is going on? They're a new player to the political spectrum. The question became, how do you survive? We survived by finding a spokesperson. And for us, Tom Hormel is was the person that was most, we picked on him and said, you're going to be our spokesperson. You're the person that's going to be out on point answering those questions in the media. We developed talking points, and we discovered the real critical part of this was staying the course on those talking points. And when the news hits, you get all kinds of reactions on either side. Tom, let's bring you in right now to talk about what it was like to find yourself going from realtor to putting on the hat to being a spokesperson for real estate and for people in our community.
Well, first, let me say the on the screen there, the thing I'm most proud of is the Realtors investment in election pays dividends. That was the front page of our local newspaper. I actually loved that headline. So, when I got brought in as the spokesperson, the first thing that we did was develop some talking points. And, Darren is a phenomenal writer, but Darren writes for Darren sometimes. And so you have to take those talking points and personalize those talking points. You have to know those talking points frontwards, backwards, sideways, every single way that you could possibly know them. And you have to personalize them, and you have to practice them. Because once you get in front of the camera or in front of that news person, they've got an agenda. They're running a story. So, and typically they have their own angle to that. So one of the things I learned was whenever I'd get a phone call about an interview, I would ask them, what angle are you looking for on this story? Sometimes they tell you, sometimes they don't, but it's good to know. Also knowing what their timeline is and what when it's going to air, all of those types of things. Another thing that I learned quickly is that those reporters are going to ask you the same question multiple times in a little bit different way, trying to get you to answer with a soundbite that they want you to answer. So one of the things that you learn very quickly is how to reframe that question. No matter what they ask you, reframe that question and bring it back to your talking points. Know where you want to go and know what you want to say. And sometimes, quite frankly, sometimes you just ignore the question. If they ask you a question that's completely off topic, you just kind of ignore that question and bring them back to your talking points. Control that interview. It sounds like it's harder than it is. It's really not if you practice this stuff. And again, if you internalize your talking points, it makes it easy. The other thing I'll tell you is during a campaign season, if you're that spokesperson, I learned very quickly that there was never a day off. I always had to have a suit on. I always had to be ready to do an interview, because the one day you decide that you're going to throw some jeans on and go do some other stuff, that's when somebody calls you and says, hey, I need you in the news studio this afternoon or in 2 hours. They never give you a whole lot of time. I find that they don't give you a ton of time. So, the main thing was that you just had to learn to stay on those talking points. Keep going back to those talking points. Don't let them lead you astray. Sometimes you could totally hear the frustration in that reporter's voice because I just didn't answer their question. This was a very unique set of circumstances, because the candidate that we weren't supporting, I actually went to high school with. So at one point they tried to make it about, did him and I not get along in high school? And I just kind of ignored that question and kept bringing it back to the talking points about realtors being about housing, and that we needed more inventory. We needed pro-housing ideas, and that the candidate that we weren't supporting had been in office for 10 years and had not had any achievable results in the housing sector. So the picture that you see, that you're going to see next, was an amazing evening, because the night of the election, I was at the mayor's, election night activity, and she actually called me on stage and thanked us on stage at the win, which was absolutely amazing. And we did win that mayor's race. We did win one of the city council seats. Or 2 city council seats, I'm sorry. And we didn't win the city council president race, but we did pretty darn well with all of this. And there was a level of scrutiny to us that we had never seen before, mainly because I think we had invested more in that campaign, in just the side that we were on, than had ever been spent in a mayor's race with all the parties involved. So we all know politics costs more and more as we move down the road. And so, but for the first time, the Spokane Association of Realtors and Washington Realtors, we decided that we just weren't going to, let things happen to us, that we were going to take control. We were going to work to get people elected at a local level that are going to change and advocate for housing. That's what we do. That's where we are. So I don't know, what else to really say, except for, again, know your talking points and personalize those to yourself. Take them internally.
And a good point, I can tell you this, is one of the concerns going into this was, what happens to those that we were successful at? What's that person going to be like when we go back into City Hall to try to talk with them? And in reality, it turned out it actually leveled or raised the level of respect that we have with those elected officials. We went back and said, look, these were the issues. We backed this other candidate out. We stayed with those talking points, and they respected that, and they talked about it. So what's next for Spokane? Well, it turns out we actually have 2 open seats now coming up in 2021. We have 5 county commissioner races coming in 2022. And we have 2 open seats to fill out that full council in 2023. We're excited because we actually made change, and NAR was the key driver behind that, and their guidance through all this. We just cannot understate how important that was. And for us, the slogan is game on. Thank you for your opportunity.
Great, great. That's great stuff. And I love your comment about sometimes you have to ignore the question and talk about what you want to talk about. So thank you, gentlemen. We have a couple questions for you. Was it difficult being a spokesman and facing the media?
You know, the first time you get on camera, you're shaking beforehand, but by the 23rd time, it was pretty easy. The game on was kind of it. I'd call Darren and say, "Got another call. I'm gonna go handle this interview." Maybe I've got a sickness, but I kind of enjoyed it towards the end.
Okay. How tough was it to stay on script?
It really wasn't that difficult, only because Darren and I had really worked at internalizing those talking points. And by the way, we believe all those talking points. We're realtors. This is what we do for a living. So it made it really easy to take those in and become part of your vernacular, and just everything that came out of your mouth was the same stuff over and over and over and over and over. So repeating that stuff, working at it, and again, making it yours so that you're speaking in the way that you typically speak. Don't try to take somebody else's talking points and speak them that way. Internalize them and make them yours. So it really wasn't that difficult.
Hey, Kevin, so in my previous life, I worked as a television journalist, but I also was a professor at Washington State University where I taught crisis communication. And I can tell you, if you want the secret to know how to look good on camera, the number one thing you can do is believe in what you're talking about. And since we believe strongly in advocating for our customers and for our realtors and in property rights and those elements, it was a very easy transition to be able to create talking points that people could really understand. And Tom knocked it out of the park, hands down. So I'm just saying, for advice for anyone else that wants to do this, develop talking points early and find a good spokesperson.
That's great stuff. Thank you. Thanks to both of you for being here today. Next up, please welcome the 2021 president of the Maryland Realtors, Dee Dee Miller. Joining Dee Dee on screen is Susan Mitchell, the Government Affairs Director for the Maryland Realtors. Welcome, ladies. Tell us about your campaign.
Oops, somebody's phone's ringing. Susan, you want to start? I'll go ahead. Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Maryland Realtors 2021 President, Dee Dee Miller, and I'm happy to present to you today regarding Maryland's campaign. And what we can tell you for certain is that timing is absolutely everything. Maryland Realtors was extremely fortunate for taking part in a recent State of Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development homeownership study work group, which I happen to be a part of. That is quite a mouthful, and it was a very long study group. Additionally, in the interim before the 2021 legislative session and prior to the beginning of the campaign, a group of our members and staff met with the Senate Pro Tem, who was leading the Senate work group on equity and inclusion for Maryland's newly elected Senate president. We also worked with a couple of legislators during the interim on other housing opportunity proposals as well. Combine all of that with a relatively new Speaker of the House being a strong advocate for key bill of the housing affordability slate, and you have a very strong foundation to promote housing affordability. Or at least one would think. Couple all that with a worldwide pandemic and a state of emergency, and new competing priorities tend to emerge. However, overall, we had a very successful campaign. Open Doors to Maryland to Stronger Neighborhoods is ongoing housing opportunity campaign that recently sought to pass legislation which lowers barriers to homeownership this past legislative session as part of phase 2 of our campaign. The Maryland Realtors and House and Senate leadership proposed legislation for the 2021 legislative session to expand housing opportunities statewide. The bills included initially a tax-free home buyer savings account, legislation expanding the Department of Housing and Community Development mortgage and down payment programs, legislation to assist development of cottage cluster type developments, and legislation to study how to close the gap in homeownership rates between whites and non-white households. The association worked with a developer of cottage cluster developments in drafting the cottage cluster legislation and worked with the legislator who introduced the legislation seeking to study closing the gap in homeownership rates as well as addressing missing middle housing. The recent goal of the campaign was twofold: to pass a slate of housing affordability study bills for the 2021 session, as well as foster an awareness of the housing affordability and supply issue and brand the campaign for future state of housing reports each year before session. Increasing homeownership opportunities is good for all Marylanders and helps to build stronger neighborhoods, communities, and individual wealth. Of course, Maryland Realtors wholeheartedly supported all of the proposed bills, especially the homebuyer savings account legislation. They recently passed a bill that was based on a bill that we actually requested back in 2018. That bill passed the Senate but was never voted on in the House due to concerns by the House Chair of the Ways and Means Committee. The association has supported the Maryland mortgage and down payment programs and promotes them among the membership. The association also spoke to Senate leadership, who proposed the legislation recommending the program be expanded. As mentioned, this session was like no other, having been all virtual for the lobbyists and Marylanders alike. The General Assembly met in chambers, socially distant, and virtually from January till April, they were resuming their meetings. And now, speaking of technology, if it works for us, we would like to share part of our hearing with our testimony.
Start with Dee Dee Miller.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and members of the committee. My name is Dee Dee Miller, and I am the 2021 president of Maryland Realtors. And I am here in support of House Bill 1178, which creates a tax-preferred savings account for first-time Maryland homebuyers. HB 1178 allows individuals to contribute up to $5,000 a year into a designated account and deduct that amount from their state taxes. Up to $50,000 may be contributed or earned tax-free if that money is used to pay down payment or closing costs within 15 years of establishing that account. Down payment and closing costs are the biggest hurdle facing most of our first-time home buyers. Helping buyers overcome these barriers are often the best and most efficient way to help new buyers enter the market and start to build wealth through home equity. According to the Urban Institute, these challenges of shrinking housing opportunity are most evident in the growing gap in the home ownership rates of white households and households of color. That gap is now about 30 percentage points nationally. Maryland Realtors recently launched a consumer campaign called Open Doors to Stronger Neighborhoods to expand homeownership opportunities, and we believe HB 1178 will help do just that. As part of the Open Doors Maryland campaign, Maryland Realtors conducted a statewide survey examining Marylanders' attitudes about housing, and the poll revealed that obstacles to homeownership, like funds for a down payment, stagnant wage growth, and student debt, were experienced greater by people of color. HB 1178 targets this primary source of funds by giving individuals a tax incentive to establish their own home buyer savings account, as well as an incentive for relatives to save for an identified home buyer like a child or a grandchild. Maryland Realtors recognizes the important role of homeownership plays in wealth building for all Maryland families and encourages a favorable report of HB 1178. And if I have time to add briefly to Delegate, to Delegate Long's point about the incentive, leaving the state, I think, frankly, that would incentivize buyers to stay in the state, to be able to utilize those funds without having to pay those taxes. And with Delegate Barnes' question in reference to the number of first-time Maryland home buyers that we may be experiencing in our marketplace, unfortunately, the State Department doesn't keep records of that specifically, but we estimate it to be approximately 31%, which is a little bit on the low side this year. It's generally about 40%, and those are the statistics that I can provide to you today with this testimony. So again, we encourage a favorable support of HB 1178. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Claudia Randall.
So we had a great hearing overall with that, and it was nice as we were going to throw in some statistics that actually was not part of our testimony there at the end to answer some of the questions that were ongoing during the initial phase of the questions that they were asking, actually other people who were also testifying at the same time. So it was a great discussion, and while there were some amendments that removed some parts of the bill, a good bill really was still passed. Susan, would you like to discuss some of the background and elements of the campaign?
Absolutely. So just by way of background, in preparation for session, we undertook phase 1 of the Housing Opportunity Campaign, the Open Doors to Stronger Neighborhoods. That campaign asked the public to tell their stories. A lot like Tom was mentioning, you had to relate to the people, you had to tell your stories. So about the housing needs in Maryland, and to sign a petition to expand housing opportunities. The phase 1 campaign also created a consumer database, which we'll continue to be using to activate consumers in our efforts. Phase 1 conducted a bulletin board groups. They're basically like online focus groups. Obviously, in times of COVID, everything was done virtually, so we had to move to online. This examined minority opinions on homeownerships and barriers. So finally, in conjunction with the phase 1 opportunity campaign, our association launched its first state of real estate housing survey, which we plan to continue to use through the Open Doors campaign to stronger neighborhoods. This isn't going to be static. We intend to use this as a brand ongoing. The results of that survey were released in February during session via a press conference as well as on the Open Doors Maryland website. The slide you see up there is part of the Open Doors campaign. That's www.opendoorsmaryland.org. Again, that's www.opendoorsmaryland.org. We have the stats of the need for housing affordability. We have the legislation that Dee Dee had showcased in her remarks. So we know from our housing, from the State of Housing Survey, that while the public at the time did not believe there wasn't necessarily a supply problem, obviously our realtor member, we all knew, the realtor members knew, but the public hadn't really seen it just yet. Over half believed there is too little housing for people with lower incomes, the elderly, and people with moderate incomes, which was exactly the problems that these bills targeted. So additional advocates that we had, you heard at the end of Dee Dee's testimony, the Maryland Housing Counselors, as well as the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. And then ultimately, the Speaker of the House became a fan of the Home Buyers Savings Account. So just to tell you some of the elements of the campaign, I know a lot of you are familiar with it. I mentioned the bulletin boards, which again are focus groups. We interviewed renters of color who were interested in owning a home, about 30% total. And the focus was truly on down payment assistance and home prices. The statewide poll, it was most Marylanders, they didn't emphasize the supply problem, but were very concerned about affordability. They were a little resistant to density. However, whether you were an owner or a renter, everyone was worried about the housing affordability issue. Then the research that we mentioned, it was entitled The Myth of Affordability with Low Interest Rates. And the reason it was entitled as such, as you know, many of the legislators were saying, how is affordability an issue? The rates are like 1%, sometimes, 2% in that range last year. Well, while that was the case, a lot of the folks that had affordable homes, they were staying in those affordable homes and obviously taking advantage of the lower rates and accessing their equity. This didn't free up that affordable housing. Additionally, with the research, we were able to tease out that average affordability decreased by 10% for every 1% of closing costs. So we mentioned the website. You can go there if you want to see any of the additional information, as well as the press conference we mentioned, the consumer dashboard, which we'll continue to use. And then additionally, we had digital ads via the website, mail petition. The mail petitions, a lot of the folks, that was done via the website where consumers could tell their story. And then following in the phase 2 of the campaign, we had tear-off mailers. A lot of you might wonder, I mean, just for show and tell, this is the tear-off, and this part goes to the legislator that had all the issues of our campaign as well as the bills. We had radio segments, and I guess if I can right here, I can show you one of the radio spots.
Affordable housing in Maryland is disappearing because so many people want to live in Maryland, but there's too little housing. That drives housing prices up, and that drives average people out, especially young families, people of color, and women. We can't wait any longer. Maryland needs more housing, affordable housing, and we need it now. And you can help. Go to opendoorsmaryland.org. Tell the General Assembly we need more housing, affordable housing, and we need it now.
So that was one of the ads that you would get either via a website, if you happen to be geofenced or targeted. The targeting, as you all know, the marketing is amazing. You can really hone in on your advocates. They had what they called the OTT advertising, which is over the top, where we were targeting through streaming, whether it's the Hulu or some of the Netflix. I won't get into the budget, although I have to say, I'll go into the highlights first. The highlights, we had over 500 petition signers throughout the campaign, nearly 100 personal stories, 1,335 of those postcards were sent to 106 legislators throughout the campaign. We kept all the consumer advocates involved. And then just setting the groundwork for future campaigns. This branding has been instrumental for us. What we did truly learn is having an educated constituent is our best advocate. A lot of what Tom was emphasizing, know your points. So I think that covers it. Is there anything you can think of, Dee Dee?
No, that was really thorough with everything that we've put forth. And I think that really covers it. And most importantly, we are extremely grateful for NAR's support, not only financially, but professionally as well, with the exceptional staff and vendors that we deployed throughout this. And this is not just a one and done. This is a multi-year campaign. So we look forward to that continued relationship. And we really could not have been had the success thus far without the help of NAR.
I second that as well.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks for sharing that with us and telling us about your campaign. I'm wondering, given the moving parts of the campaign and your legislative session, how did you manage the campaign?
It was challenging. You want to jump in, Susan? Go for it.
Okay. Yep. Actually, I'll jump in on that one. Just sort of to dovetail on what Dee Dee was saying. We work very closely with NAR, their vendors, Real Strategies, and American Strategies with regard to all the creativity, the digital production. They had a very streamlined timeline that with all our approvals and getting things to be timely published, it was a great synergy, great effort.
Okay. Dee Dee, as president and practitioner and working through the pandemic, was that helpful in any way during the legislative hearings and the press conferences?
Absolutely, it really was. I was directly aware of the housing supply issues, working obviously in the business and the bidding wars that were ongoing. And that gave me the opportunity really to share that information firsthand through the real life experiences. And I think this really proves to help our legislators understand the daily struggles that we face helping our clients buy and sell real estate right now with the limited housing inventory that's available.
Okay, great. Did you receive any negative feedback?
Yeah, unfortunately we did. Do you want to handle that, Susan?
Now, granted, it wasn't much, but some of our constituents who may not have disagreed with our message took the liberty to sort of write some of these expletives on the tear card and send them to the legislators, which the legislator who truly believed they were always an advocate for home ownership and a champion for the realtors said, well, what did I do? And we explained the situation, apologized profusely, and just ongoing, you will get some of the constituents, especially with the consumer campaign, that will not necessarily agree with you. And then you just have to explain your story and hopefully they understand. And if not, just thank them for their feedback and move on.
Okay, great, thanks. Thank you very much. Our last panelists for today are from the great state of Colorado. Please welcome Will Flowers, broker-owner of Wentworth Company. Presenting alongside Will is Liz Peets, the Vice President of Government Affairs with the Colorado Association of Realtors. Thank you, Will and Liz. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. As we all looked at 2020 and the conversations we were all having around racial justice, we were also looking at Colorado's 2021 plans for our 100th year in existence. So what we did was take those conversations taking place and figure out, okay, how can we take the conversations into an impactful public policy solution and celebrate our 100 year in a really impactful way? So our campaign is called A Century of Opportunity, and it really focuses on us trying to make the next century of opportunity one that everyone in Colorado can access. We did use an issues mobilization grant from NAR and worked with our colleagues at Real Strategies. Like our other presenters spoke about, we did focus groups to the both rural areas of the state and our more urban areas that are diverse. And then we also had member-facing and consumer-facing petition and information gathering. Then we took those conversations and partnered with Habitat for Humanity to develop a package of legislation of 4 bills. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So the first bill is really, well, these first 2 bills are about preparing to enter homeownership and how Colorado is spending its housing dollars. So high schoolers will now graduate with a curriculum requirement that allows them to understand how to prepare for retirement, understanding credit card use, how to prepare for student loan debt and getting a higher education degree, and importantly to us, preparing for home ownership. This was originally a bill from the bankers that we then co-opted into our 4-bill package. The second bill requires our Division of Housing to tell us what they're doing with the dollars they get federally, state, and private. Where are they creating or preserving units around the state? And what type of housing is it? Is it rental, supportive, rapid rehousing, or home ownership? Finally, our third and fourth bill are 2 really innovative ideas. They allow us to first invest in a pilot program. So we're working with CHAFA, which is our housing authority that does most of our LIHTC credits here. And they will run the program that allows landlords to participate with tenants that opt into the program and regularly report the rental payments they're making to credit bureau agencies as a way for them to build credit, much like a mortgage does in terms of equity, but without that negative impact. And we think this is critically important. In some of our research, it showed that if we don't allow people to build that credit, they won't be prepared to enter homeownership, particularly in our populations of color. And the last bill is a menu of options bill. It is a stimulus program that is going to fund $13 million in best practices in affordable housing development. There are 3 coordinated programs because the housing division had 2 programs they added in for beginner and intermediate local governments, whether they need comprehensive planning or use a consultant. But the menu bill part is ours. So essentially we give local governments grants if they adopt at least 3 best practices in affordable housing development or come up with something innovative. You can see here on our slide some of the things we put in the menu. The idea is to stretch local governments beyond what they're currently doing. And we actually think this has a great foundation for us to eventually make this a general fund program. We have land donation, acquisition, land banking, creating a vacant public property list. But I think some of the most important ones are expediting permit, whether it's to develop affordable housing or reduce permitting fees, but also to repurpose property that's commercial that could be affordable housing. Also, the water submetering and infrastructure build-outs are really important to bring down those costs for developers. And of course, I know we all talk about this, accessible dwelling units, what I would call density in general, duplexes, triplexes, and other multifamily housing as a use by right in single-family residential zoning districts. And then also creating small square footage housing that works for our seniors or our first-time buyers, and reducing parking requirements. So we're really proud of it, and we're very excited to see it moving through the legislature. I am now going to turn the floor over to Will to talk about how we're working with our Diversity and Inclusion Committee on our advocacy approach.
Great. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate that. CAR's Legislative Policy Committee has a history of supporting legislation that enhances fair housing and housing availability. And with the establishment of our new Diversity and Inclusion Committee, members of both committees, as well as the association staff, identified the opportunity to offer support for each other's efforts, particularly those surrounding fair housing and housing equality. We recognize the importance of us focusing on our core values that bind our common interests and unify us as an association and as an industry. With that in mind, the D&I Committee extended an offer to support the LPC, specifically with respect to the highly impactful Century of Opportunity package, as well as additional fair housing and equality-related initiatives. As committee members, we understood that our participation on these committees carries with it a certain privilege and, more importantly, an obligation to uphold the values set forth by NAR and the Colorado Association of Realtors. Our intention should be and is to leave the industry better than we found it for our having served in it. We worked with CAR staff, as well as members who sit on both committees, to facilitate the best way to share information and offer our support. This openness has resulted in a fairly seamless process. Members visited each other's committee meetings, obviously through Zoom for the time being, and provided updates on the progress of relevant legislation and upcoming initiatives. The D&I Committee shared their plans for future education opportunities, as well as their newly evolving structure. This allowed the LPC to gain a more clear understanding of the priorities of the D&I Committee, and with that in mind, to make decisions regarding supporting, opposing, or amending proposed legislation. Knowing the priorities and the goals of the LPC allowed the D&I Committee to work toward building a more sustainable and intentional structure, keeping in mind its ability to help effect real change at the Capitol through this collaboration. The support of mutually beneficial legislation and advocacy efforts has helped the association and our members unify around the core values of fair housing, housing equality, and housing availability. As we all know, involvement in politics is often a volatile endeavor. However, as long as we're clear on what we stand for, hold true to our core values, and see ourselves as that steady rock in that raging sea of politics, we can't help but do what's right for our industry, the public, and housing overall. By seeking out opportunities to support each other, the LPC and the D&I committees have clearly reaffirmed their commitment to help each of our members and our communities to live out the promise of our industry and that of the Realtor brand. Furthermore, this collaboration has helped CAR be stronger and even more effective when advocating for the Century of Opportunity bills at the state legislature. CAR has been a key player in the development, advocacy, and passing of these impactful bills, which will give Colorado residents unprecedented opportunities to enjoy meaningful participation in homeownership today and well into the future. With this partnership, as with the Century of Opportunity package, CAR has reinforced the value of the advocacy offered by our local, state, and national associations by helping to secure a more sustainable and responsible housing future for our industry and for our state. With this collaboration, CAR has made it easier for our disparate and diverse populations across the state to participate with each other on mutually beneficial initiatives and programs. This unified presence has also reinforced to those outside of our organization how important fair housing, housing equality, and housing availability are to our industry and our members. So with that, I will hand it back to Kevin. If you have any questions for us, we'd be happy to address those and speak more.
Thank you, Will and Liz. Thank you very much. And I think we do have time for a couple of follow-up questions. What has been your biggest challenge in your legislative advocacy approach?
Yeah, I can take that one. Honestly, keeping everyone in the Capitol on track and not have them selfishly advocate for getting money for what they already do. We have a lot of great local government advocacy organizations, and our urban colleagues need to also have different priorities than our rural colleagues. So keeping everybody on track and making sure if we tweak the language for a stakeholder, we don't compromise the best practices approaches we put in the bill, specifically in the menu bill, because there's a lot of Republicans who don't want to expand government. This is, at least one of the bills is a Democratic stimulus bill, but honestly, keeping everybody, when it's a massive bill like this, on the same path without diluting the purpose and the ability to spur the next decade of housing policy is a monumental task. And I'm so glad to have our Diversity and Inclusion Committee working with us on this, because they really help us take the message further than we could alone, just as staff.
Great, thanks. Just for clarity, can you reiterate why these bills matter to members and housing supply policy?
Will, do you want to start?
Sure. I think it starts setting a more sustainable future for potential buyers in the future, for people who currently are in the industry and or in the market, and for our industry, for us as realtors as well. I think it lays that foundation for that leading well into the future. Liz, do you have anything to add to that?
The other thing that I would add to what Will said is housing policy is really hard to make changes because there's so many stakeholders, and it's a supply issue across the country. Colorado's not alone in that, but it's particularly acute in Colorado during the pandemic because we've seen a lot of our coasterly wealthy folks move into our state from all around our borders because it's a great place to live and remote work. We have really good broadband, even though we're continuing to always work on it. But they're displacing our local civil servants and our blue-collar workforces in our beautiful mountain and rural cities here. It's always expensive in the metro area, but we have an ability to try to create more supply with these bills and lift people up. And honestly, it's more dire than it's ever been since we've been tracking affordability. I've never seen the numbers this bad. So it's really important for realtors to be creative and proactive in creating policy that continues not only to let our members work, but also to be really vibrant members of the community in doing something that could spur the next decade of policy. So we're really proud of the bills, and we're very happy that our members are supporting the bills because it enables them to be great neighbors.
Right, and it does address those issues today that we're facing, which is very important. But I think it's even more important that it addresses those issues down the road. It's setting that standard for, especially the education requirement. It's building up the future home buyers so that if that happens again, there's a wave of people coming in with lots of cash. Perhaps the workforce that's here is better prepared and in a better position to compete, I guess, with those buyers coming in, or at least hold their own against them. So I see it's both. It's today and it's planning down the road, which is why I got really excited about it and supported it, because it does both.
Great. Finally, can you talk a little bit about the connection between diversity and inclusion and legislative advocacy work, and what other realtor associations might consider if taking this approach in the future?
Well, I think I sit on both committees. Yeah, so I sit on both committees. I think that there's obviously mutual values and goals in both, just different approaches and different missions for each one. But understanding that there are key elements that cross over there and there's values that cross over there, it just makes each one stronger. And I know in the past in other organizations, especially that I've been a part of, they've been very divided and siloed, and I support bringing those together. And if there's a way for us to collaborate, we're all members of the same association. We just are on different committees. And so I think it's been really, really powerful. Just the short time that we've done it, I'm really excited to see it going forward. It's only going to get stronger. And I think for other associations that might be considering it, being clear to maintain each committee's values and mission and perspective, while allowing other perspectives to come in, while allowing that other committee to have a say or to share what they might be important to them. I think that's really important, to not let one outweigh the other, but really to focus that as a collaborative partnership for the common goal and the common good for the association. I think that's really important. And if you can balance that, then you're going to have a successful collaboration.
Okay.
And I would say
This is
it's
great
not
stuff.
easy. So we make it sound easy, but there's a lot of things we adjust and make sure. These are tough issues when we talk about diversity in housing. So I don't want you to think it's really simple. We work really hard to coordinate. So I'm really appreciative that we've put in the time this year, because it's paid off.
A lot of that
Great,
credit goes to
great.
the building staff behind the scenes that are those, the ducks feet under the water that are treading really quickly to keep us all moving forward. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
Great. Okay, thanks to all of our panelists today. Thank you very much for speaking. We're fortunate to be able to hear your stories this afternoon. Your perspective on community engagement and advocacy provide indispensable insight into the true reach of the Realtor Party. Events like this one here today are precisely why I'm so confident that realtors will be at the vanguard of our nation's efforts to recover from the pandemic and build a more prosperous future. Before I close, let me remind you that NAR is here to serve you. If you have questions about pandemic-related resources or NAR benefits in general, call our dedicated hotline. The number is 1-800-874-6500. One more time, 1-800-874-6500. You can text COVID-19 to 30644 to get information on your ongoing advocacy efforts. And you can visit realtorparty.realtor for more information on all of our toolkits and assistance programs. The Realtor Party aims to make every realtor association across America the campaign headquarters for equitable and affordable homeownership and private property rights. Your continued engagement helps us drive forward toward that goal. It guarantees that we can keep fighting to advance our interests, those of your fellow realtors, and those of your clients and communities you serve. I look forward to the day, sometime soon, when we can gather in person to recount just how much we have achieved during these trying times. Until then, be well, stay safe, and thank you.